Hi, I'm Irene.
Hi, I'm Karen.
We're going to talk about orgasmic streaming, organic gardening, Electroculture, which is an exhibition project that we co-curated in 2018 in relation to the topic of group work and collaboration. We're going to do this through a series of questions as prompts that Catherine has sent us. So the first question, can you give us a brief description of orgasmic streaming, organic gardening, Electroculture?
Thanks. So this was a group exhibition that looked at practices that emerge between text and performance, the page and the body, combining a display and events programme of historical and contemporary works by Beatrice Gibson, Alison Knowles, Gil Lung, Anea Lockwood, Roy Clare Potter, Charlotte Prodger, Carolee Schneeman, Tai Shani, and Miyako Shomi. Newly commissioned and existing works intersected with an array of archival material located in Carolee Schneeman's Parts of a Body House, a text from which the exhibition title was derived, and Alison Knowles and Anea Lockwood's score anthology, Women's Work. The exhibition presented an alternative framework to look at the influence of conceptual procedures, as well as experimental writing within contemporary feminist performance practices across visual art, sound, and text. The exhibition highlighted these significant transhistorical sensibilities, whilst acknowledging their disconnections or disjunctures. Each artist brought a particular method, procedure, or interrogation to the act of writing or performing text, blurring descriptions such as text, score, work, performance, version, and iteration. This was activated within the gallery with a series of workshops and events, but also with a performance day at Lux.
So I guess to pick up on what Karen was saying, the historical materials were each flowing from our own personal research areas. And I guess at the heart of the shared concern with how to work with these historical materials as curators that are sort of score-based or between text and performance is this question about their sort of duality and their iterativity. So on the one hand, you have paper materials or ephemera that you can exhibit in maybe more conventional means in a gallery, and on the other hand, they're inherently implicit, live, iterative, sort of social materiality that's much more complex, I think, to gesture towards, particularly in the gallery environment. So in that regard, we worked with our designer quite carefully on resetting the historical scores or texts for the gallery architecturally. So, you know, blowing them up, for instance, to be in the scale of the gallery. And on the other hand, we were very keen to understand and acknowledge the limits of the gallery, and that's why we chose to have the main live performance programs completely elsewhere and separate in a more appropriate environment that perhaps acknowledged the context of the historical works. Which leads on to questions about collaboration and linear histories that come up in this next question. What's the importance of thinking about groups in your curation, and does it help to think beyond linear histories?
Yeah, so just to echo something that Irene was touching upon, the show came together through a shared connection that we had with the historical materials that we were engaging with as PhD researchers. And so the exhibition kind of comes through us locating materials that we had understood as being sort of unacknowledged or under-acknowledged in our historical contexts, and that activating them and understanding them required a particular type of dialogue that related to a community of works in relation to each other rather than a kind of individualized environment or interpretation. And that also we felt very distinctly that they had something to add to contemporary dialogue now that we were seeing work from many of the artists that are actually featured in the show, that kind of spoke very much to the kinds of ideas and contexts that the historical work was also alluding to. And this is very particular for me in terms of something that actually came out of the process of exhibition making with Gil Lung's work, which you can see on the slide now. Colour hides the canvas, moulding hides the frame, where we were responding to a set of instructions by the artist to paint every visible window with yogurt. And so this kind of procedure that we undertook that had all kinds of unrealised kind of consequences to the show in terms of the ways in which the yogurt diffused the light in the space, so it kind of affected the works that were contained, and also this kind of unacknowledged organic experiment that ended up where we had mice coming in each evening to eat the yogurt from the bottom of the window panes. So I felt that had some kind of very distinctive relationship to the kind of promise of organic gardening and orgasmic streaming somehow. So there was something that was going on that was completely live, very much in terms of, you know, yogurt and probiotics, and a kind of live event that actually also happened while no one was there, when the gallery was closed. And so there was a kind of extended dialogue that was going on that we had no idea of until we kind of understood what was actually going on with the mice. Yes, so just to hand back to Irene.
I guess I'd add to that story that for me the work also very unusually in this particular gallery blocked the view from outside, so it produced a sort of more intimate environment for the works to exist in that I think very much, just popping back to the Oliveros slide, mirrored the kinds of environments that were being produced historically, that some of the historical materials came out of as well, where maybe audiences didn't need to exist. So yeah, I think what's perhaps interesting in terms of the question about feminism and collaboration here is that the historical works, and I guess I think by the same token, some of the contemporary works have a very distinct relationship to this question of the individual and the group, and in fact, in some cases actually grapple with that in their content as well as their form, and that's to say that the notion of collaboration and of singular authorship are enshrined and understood as very important in a way that precedes, I guess, the feminist movement of the 1970s. But I think answers a lot of questions that were being explored then, and has a very direct connection through someone like Oliveros or Schneemann, but also this more speculative connection in its very form that I think we were trying to explore with the exhibition. We wanted to add a coda about art stars, or the question about art stars, which I guess was to say that maybe they're only interesting when they're leveraging their own platform for others within the community. And I think that's something you see in Schneemann's work and the work of people like Oliveros very particularly. And that's quite an interesting strategy. Would you add anything, Karen?
Yeah, just to say that there's an extremely non-linear aspect to all of this, really. And in some ways the show, the exhibition kind of activated that, that it's representative far more of a network of intersections and flows between works. And this was part of what we were doing curatorially, was attempting to kind of question the nature of hierarchical frameworks within making, but also within display. And that kind of goes back to the kind of premise that Gil's work presented in relation to Caroline Schneemann's work, for example. But this is also part of our research, but we'll get onto this maybe more in question 3, but just to say, yeah, we figured that it's more about constellations of people than it is about stars necessarily.
So how would you describe your approach to curating? Do you consider it to be feminist? And if so, how? And we've merged the fourth question here. How compatible are feminist methodologies with institutions? So I guess I wanted to say two brief things to start off with here. And the first is that there's a very obvious point to be made about feminist curating existing not only in the content of the work or the sort of immediate strategy of curating, but in the processes and in the infrastructures and institutions that are produced by curators, which obviously is a whole topic in itself. But I think one very interesting point to make here is that it's actually quite unusual in a way for curators to collaborate, or there's usually some sort of distinct hierarchy within curating. And what was quite nice in our own personal process was that we were bringing these two very distinct sets of historical research, no matter how close and, you know, often overlapping those were, that gave us an autonomy that very much mirrored the sort of singular authorship of these kinds of works, but also the possibility for communing and a generative, productive coming together that the works themselves also produce. And I suppose what I'd say about that is that for me, all of these questions around curating and institutions and organizational structures are also very often present in the works themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, a lot of these questions flow into each other, but also the concerns that we had curatorially are very much reflective of the research concerns we have. In particular, for me, it's the relationship of the materials that I was researching, which are classified as kind of secondary materials, and they are held within libraries and archives as opposed to art collections, speaks to a particular type of structural dynamic that, in a sense, has excluded these works from being considered to be anything more than that. Historically, and so part of the research process is to kind of elaborate and illustrate these works in a more coherent context of art making as opposed to publishing, perhaps, or the fact that these two things, you know, obviously inevitably cross over. And this again feeds into this sort of the context of curating and methodologies of curating, where programming can be utilised by institutions as a kind of way of inhabiting spaces that maybe are more diverse and involve a more diverse group of people. But the sort of superstructure of the actual institutional framework remains kind of unchanged by those programs. And so, in a sense, a lot of our questions are related to the kind of formal frameworks of art production as it's understood through collecting institutions. And these are, I would say, structural issues that we still face as feminist curators. So I guess the implication is the compatibility doesn't necessarily exist in some senses, because you actually have to kind of undo a lot of those institutional frameworks to implicate feminist curation within it.
Do we want to add any final thoughts? I guess we did think a little bit about our own process in very pedestrian terms as well, which is that I want to say that we, when working together, have always foregrounded, or rather foregrounded our personal needs above productivity.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time together, working together, and that was amazing. And a part of what's interesting to us to work together is to continue to kind of institute ideas that we find collectively useful. And we spent time thinking about what a feminist institution would be. And so, in some respects, a lot of what we do is hopeful of building those types of environments for us to work within, as well as an invitation for people to work with us. And those things would be, you know, obviously non-hierarchical and intergenerational and supportive of difference.
Different capacities.
Sorry?
Different capacities.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. We have a long list of things that we'd like to
maybe we can do a discussion.
That maybe we can talk about more in a sort of different environment. But yeah, I think those things remain hopeful. Definitely.
Should we end on that note?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening to us.
Thank you.